So right now, I sort of straddle a marketing team and a research team, but being the bridge between those things is really tricky because marketing people don't necessarily understand the science and sciencey people don't necessarily understand the marketing. Like many of us, I suppose, just really wanted to make a difference, and the charity sector allows you to do that. Rare diseases allow you to do that.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello there, and welcome to Research Adjacent Podcast, episode 46. Although we've had a few research communicators on the podcast before, today we have our first press officer. Jade Passey is Senior Science and Health Press Officer at the Brain Tumour Charity, where she helps to share the charity's work with fundraisers and other partners. As you'll hear, it's a role that she loves, even though it is a big sidestep from her initial ambition to be a vet. After some initial bonding over our rescue dogs, which I have edited out, but now I'm wondering if I should have left it in, we get on to talking about how this career is something that Jade has evolved into rather than aimed for. But she knows her stuff, and there's lots of good advice about how to connect with different audiences and make them care about research. Although it's safe to say she's not in a rush to do any big public engagement events again anytime soon. Listen on to hear why. Welcome along to the podcast, Jade. It's lovely to have you here. And I wonder if you could tell us, first of all, a bit about what it is that you do and how you fit into this research adjacent world.
Perfect. Well, thank you ever so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm Jade. I currently work at the Brain Tumour Charity as their Senior Press Officer for Science and Health. The charity is the largest global funder of research into brain tumours. So my job fits really perfectly into making sure that all of the research that we fund is communicated effectively to all sorts of audiences, from people affected by brain tumours to fundraisers to other researchers to bigger stakeholders that just need to know about what we do and why we do it. So I've been at the charity for nearly 2 years, and it's just a weird and wonderful world of being part of the charity. It's not a sector I ever, anticipated being part of. And I think that's kind of the beauty of this research adjacent world, is that you end up thinking you've got this really clear path and you've got this research focus and you know what you're going to do. And then all of a sudden, for me anyway, I realized I just didn't fit into that world, the academic world. I just didn't feel like that's where what was my place and that's where I would fit. So ended up, trying a comms role for a European funded program. Had no idea about communications at the time. Definitely found my way through that for a couple of years, and it's kind of carried on from there, really, just making sure that I have all of the different comms experience that's needed, which is how I ended up at the Brain Tumour Charity in their PR team and looking at science press and communicating with science journalists. So as always, a really weird and wacky winding path to where we get to.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think we'll get into some of the details of that as we go along. So one thing that you mentioned there is that you have done a comms role before, but this is a press officer role. How are those two things different?
When I started, so as soon as I left my PhD and I'd done my PhD and I was like, this is not quite right for me. So ended up in a comms role. And so that was very much, I very much like looking at social media, making sure our website was really good, making sure that we could connect with all sorts of external audiences. And so it was very broad. So you become a kind of jack of all trades. You can do a bit of social media, you can do a bit of website, like WordPressy stuff is what I did. You can like organize events, that kind of thing. So you kind of just do a bit of everything that comes your way, and you basically just say yes to everything and give it all a go. And when it came to trying to hone my skills, I thought actually the one thing that's missing is the press and the PR side of things. And so where I am now is much more about, it's obviously a lot of external communications, but a lot about connecting with science journalists and thinking, I guess, more about like reputational things, making sure that the messaging for our external audiences is really, really clear. So it's a much more sort of honed in part of a bigger communications picture. So primarily what I do is a lot of, pitching stories to journalists, trying to get some of our science in front of different audiences. And that's quite tricky because science on its own doesn't tend to do that. So we always couple it with like a really strong case study. So somebody who's been affected by a brain tumor, somebody who supports our research, is really excited by what we do. So we kind of have to couple those things together, which I think as a scientist at heart is really tricky, but that's the most important thing about getting it to an audience that is maybe completely cold to our cause. And obviously brain tumors don't affect all that many people. At the charity we see it differently, but on a whole they don't affect many people. So actually being able to get those audiences that have never even considered brain tumors in their life is a really important part of what I do.
Interesting. And it's interesting as well that what you say is that, the science isn't enough, the research isn't enough. You need that human story element as well to reach a lot more people.
Yeah, and I found that quite difficult at the beginning. Obviously, I am a very caring, compassionate person, but first and foremost, I've only ever thought about science and research outcomes and how we should make people understand science and we should make it accessible to people. So it wasn't until joining the brain tumor charity that actually I saw a completely different side of it, and how, especially for journalists, is making, like I say, science, for science journalists, science on its own is enough. But if you want to reach even bigger audiences, you absolutely have to have that personal connection. And I've had this sort of internal battle with myself with whether, it's letting go too much of the science. And is the science coming second? And I've had that kind of internal battle. But I think it's one thing that as you progress through these kind of careers, you sort of let the science go a little bit. We've done a recent workshop about lay writing, and when you're saying to people, you just have to cut out most of the science. And that's really hard as a person who is so passionate about science. But if you want to be good at communicating it, you sort of cut out 90% of the science, which is really tricky.
I've had very similar conversations at time, and yeah, it doesn't always go down very well. But then the people who get good at it, it makes a huge difference to their career. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the reasons to keep pushing it, keep encouraging it. Yeah. Excellent. Oh, well, it sounds like you've hinted at there. I think maybe we should hear a little bit more about your story and how you came to find yourself there. So you've highlighted some of the different roles that you've done, but tell us a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so strange. I guess we all say it, don't we? We all say it's a bit of a strange journey. So we'll go back to school. That's a really long time ago now. But when I was at school, I was adamant that I was going to be a vet. I was going to vet school and that was going to be my life. And so when you have that in your mind, it's really hard because you would go to university, you would study veterinary medicine, and then you would go and be a vet. And that is a very, very linear, very easy career path. And that is what I had in my mind. So having to let that go was really, really tricky. And I just wasn't very good at chemistry. So going to vet school was never going to happen for me, which is absolutely fine. But I think when you're in school and you think that that's your life, and to have that kind of taken away when your chemistry teacher is like, there's no way you're getting an A in chemistry. And then you kind of look at it and you're like, what am I going to do with my life? Like I thought I had it all set out. So I did the next best thing that I thought at university was veterinary bioscience. So it was, all of the sciencey stuff behind the medicine, but not actually the medicine. And when I was doing that, I actually found that I had a real love for microbiology, bacteriology in particular. I'd never even considered bacteria as an important thing. So going into our microbiology labs and growing all of these bacteria, I was like, this is the one. This is really interesting. So then, fast forward a few years, I did my PhD in veterinary microbiology. So specifically looking at bacteria that causes disease in poultry, and then having a look at how probiotics could be used in poultry to basically prevent disease and keep the chickens really healthy in an environment that doesn't necessarily like have healthy chickens. So just looking at different ways to do that. And I loved it. I loved the idea of it. I enjoyed some of the lab work, but at the end of the 4 years, I was definitely like, this is just not for me anymore. It's just not what works for me. I think I'm not necessarily the most, and it seems like a ridiculous thing to say because I've got a PhD, but I don't feel in myself that I'm the most academic person. It doesn't come naturally to me. I find it really difficult. And so I think when you're surrounded by all of these like really incredible, intelligent people, and you don't consider yourself to be one of those, and maybe this is a theme that's come up a lot for you too, but imposter syndrome just weighs really, really heavy.
Yeah.
And I distinctly remember presenting my PhD to my funding body, and they were a charity that just funded poultry research, and they were a mixture of scientists and a mixture of poultry farmers. And I presented my work, and I thought I really good job, loads of graphs, loads of data, really excited by it. And then one of the farmers was sort of at the back, and he fell asleep in my presentation.
Oh, no.
And it's fine. He was in his 80s. It's completely legitimate. But what it made me realise that I clearly had not pitched my work appropriately for the audience that I was presenting to. I'd pitched it appropriately for the scientists in the room, but the whole point of the work was to improve poultry health and poultry production and things like that. So actually, if I couldn't communicate that to the people that needed to hear about it, then I was doing a bad job. And I'd done a bad job because he fell asleep. And I don't blame him, because I presented loads of real like nitty gritty data. And I remember distinctly the graphs on the screen. Like, that's not what he wanted. He wanted to know what I was doing and how it would help him. And I think from that point onwards, I realized that communications was so important, and understanding your audience was so important, and making sure that everybody can understand what you're doing is so important. And so I think that was kind of the beginning of the end of my academic world, and me sort of transitioning into communications. And this was all done at the University of Surrey. And then my PhD supervisor had this comms role pop up. I had no comms experience. I think there were plenty of people that thought it was a bit weird that I got the job, but he trusted me and he had faith I could do it. And we had known each other at the time, probably, I don't know, maybe 9-10 years. So we'd known each other a really long time. And he trusted that I would do a really good job. And that, you know, that's their big boots to fill. I think that was a blessing. And he took that punt, and I will be forever grateful that he did that, because without that, and without somebody in your corner, you know, how do you transition into a slightly, I guess, adjacent world to where you thought your life was going? So,
and it is interesting when other people sometimes see something in you that you don't see in yourself. I've certainly had similar experiences at times.
Yeah, so I think that was it really. And then I just muddled my way through. I didn't know how to do the job. Our team was a team of 2. Neither of us really knew how to do the job, but we made it work, and we created a really strong comms team. We created a communication strategy for this huge European program, and we made the website better. We made the socials amazing, and we did such a great job. And I guess it was that point onwards then. So then moved to a more sciencey focused science communications role at another scientific institute sort of down the road from the University of Surrey, and then to the brain tumor charity. So strange move from the animal world to the human world, but again, it's that weird and windy career path we tend to take when we embark on these research adjacent roles, I suppose.
Yeah. And do you feel that the work you're doing now is making good use of your skills?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, you know, my love is microbiology. It is animal medicine, of course, because that's where I started. And I guess that was a bit of a weird, I was like, is this role at the brain tumor charity right for me? But I also, like many of us, I suppose, just really wanted to make a difference. And the charity sector allows you to do that. Rare diseases allow you to do that. And so I think you do have so many transferable skills as you go through your, like for me, for my research comms career, you have so many transferable skills that you can use them. So not only do I do the press side of things, I do a lot of the external communications as well. So I write a lot of blog posts about, scientific ideas, genome sequencing, that kind of stuff. So I'm still allowed to do a bit of what I'm interested in. So I can use those skills too, but while also honing my skills of the press side of things, which is, I think, more and more desired when you're going into comms roles now. There's the expectation that you've got some of that press office experience, which is tricky. It's a hard job, and you're on the go 24/7. But it's a really nice skill to have in the bag.
Yeah, excellent. And it sounds like when you said that first comms job where, you were really thrown in at the deep end, did you do training to help you, or was it just learning on the job? What did you find helped you develop your skills there?
For me, it was pretty much just learning on the job. There were a few opportunities to network with people doing similar roles. We had like conferences and stuff where you could link up with people who were doing similar roles, but it was very much a baptism of fire.
Yeah.
It was, we need you to do this, go. And I, I dabbled with Twitter as a PhD student, and that was it.
Yeah.
So there was not much more than that, but I think what was behind it was the passion and the want to do a really good job.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, pretty much everything that I did, I pretty much taught myself or learned from making mistakes and not doing a great job of, pitching things right for the right audiences and that kind of thing. So very much an on the job kind of learning experience, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, well, sometimes it's just the way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
In everything that you've done, I'm sure there are some things that you're really proud of that have worked out well. Are there any examples you'd like to tell us about?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky question, isn't it? Because there's loads of little things that sort of mount up. And I think, of course, getting my PhD is probably my proudest moment, but how I've been able to morph the skills I've learned from my PhD into comms, I think I'm overall just really proud of that, and how I've been able to turn a passion of mine into jobs I absolutely love. We've been able to organize events. I guess one of the most proud moments was when I worked at the Pirbright Institute, and I wasn't there for very long, but we organized this massive public engagement event. I'd never done public engagement before, not on that level, and we had to create this interactive game. We had to create this huge exhibit that children could play with and stuff. And I remember sitting in this room I'd booked out to think about what on earth I was going to do. And I remember trying to draw this storyboard out, and these little stick men and these little pigs and chickens and stuff. And I remember sitting there going, I don't know how on earth I'm going to do this. But I think what a PhD gives you is that it gives you that mentality of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to be able to work this out. And I think that's what PhD training does. It puts you in a position where you're like, what on earth is going on here? But you'll work it out in the end. And so I went from these like terribly drawn storyboards to this. Well, actually, it was one of the best exhibits at the Royal Society Summer Science Exhibition. And that was determined by the people that came. That's not me just saying it. And we had one of the best exhibits there. And so to go from the drawings I had in front of me to this all singing, all dancing, flashing, huge, designed thing that we'd created with this fabulous game that everybody was enjoying playing is it's probably one of my proudest moments, because I absolutely didn't believe I could do it at the time.
Fantastic. Are there pictures or videos or anything of that anywhere on the internet that we can share with people? I would think so, yes. I've certainly got plenty of pictures. I've got plenty of videos of when we were testing it in the office. Yeah. The whole thing was taller than me. It had flashing lights. It was very colourful. We had test tubes that you could pull out and pop in, and it made noise. I still don't know to this day how we pulled it off. And obviously there was a team of us that did it. But I remember before the team was fully formed, it was literally just me and a piece of paper. And then when she's now one of my really good friends, when she joined the institute, we managed to make it happen. So really, really good.
but it put me off public engagement for life.
Oh dear. Well, I think
did.
we'll have to see if we can get some pictures to put that to put in the show
Yeah,
notes. But
absolutely.
was it? Why was it? Did it put you off public engagement for life?
It was so enormous. And I
Yeah.
think Summer Science Exhibition at the Royal Society is one of those really prestigious things.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to get into. But I think it was just so intense. And to be honest, it's a full-time job. And I was doing that alongside all of the other comms functions that I was doing at the time. But I think we saw hundreds and hundreds of people, and I think it was just so exhausting, and it zaps a lot of energy from you. And although on the days we were completely buzzing because we'd created this wonderful thing, but I also think it just made me realize it was too much. It was too much for me to be at the forefront, to be seen by everybody. When you're a press officer, you're sort of behind the scenes, so you're writing all the statements and getting them signed off by other people. You are connecting people with journalists, but nobody actually ever sees what you do. It just kind of happens, and you don't think about what goes on behind the scenes to make that happen. And I think I'm definitely a more introverted, behind the scenes kind of person than on a stand chatting to hundreds of people in a day. That just doesn't suit my personality type.
Oh, well, certainly having done those things, I can understand what you mean about saying that they can be hugely overwhelming and exhausting.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're absolutely huge, aren't they? Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, you've already touched on quite a few things that have been challenging for you. Maybe it's this finding the right fit, finding the things that you feel you're good at. Are there any other particular things you haven't mentioned yet that have been difficult?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I mean, obviously I love it, and it is a career path I'm really passionate about, and I love the work I do. But it does come with its challenges. I think it's quite because there aren't many of us, there aren't many sort of science communications professionals around. And I also think in terms of, more press officer work, there's not actually that many of us. So it can be quite a lonely thing, because you are normally, within a comms team, there's sort of one person that can do that function, that science comms function. So you don't have other people to bounce ideas off of, because everybody's just looking at you like, oh yeah, all right, you talk your science kind of thing. And it's quite it's a bit tricky, because science is alienating. If you don't understand it, it alienates you, and obviously that's my role to make sure that doesn't happen. But I think that's the more natural way of things going. So it can definitely be quite lonely. But there are organizations out there are groups out there that we can connect with. I'm a member of STEMPRA, which is a science press officer network, which is absolutely fab. Once a year we get together, and it's great to meet like-minded people. And it's very much what's your job? And it's like, I do media, I do the social media, I do all of the blogs, and you just do a bit of everything. And I think that's quite overwhelming sometimes. So when you speak to other people who are in the field, that's very reassuring, and you don't feel so alone, and it's really nice to network that way. And I also think for science communications in general, it's pretty tricky, because so right now I sort of straddle a marketing team and a research team. Obviously, then you've got people with marketing minds, which I dabble in, obviously, and then you've got the people with the research and science minds, which I also dabble in. But being the bridge between those things is really tricky, because marketing people don't necessarily understand the science, and sciencey people don't necessarily understand the marketing. So you're this weird bridge between two groups of people that ordinarily probably wouldn't mix. Mm-hmm. And you have the skills to do both of those, but it's quite challenging to get the other sides really on board with what you're trying to do. Mm. And so it can be, I think that is quite tricky, because it's quite a niche field, I suppose. There's way more people doing science comms than ever before, but I think it's a bit of a weird place to sit sometimes. So I find that quite challenging, just to get the buy-in on equal level from both teams to be able to champion these things and push them. So that's pretty tricky.
Yeah, I think lots of people in these research adjacent roles do find themselves in that position, whether it's connecting researchers with communities of lived experience, researchers with comms teams, researchers with businesses, you know, all of them in that kind of bridging position. But that's one of the reasons I think it's such an interesting space as well, because it brings together all these different kinds of skills. It's kind of new and evolving. That's one of the things I like about it as well. But
absolutely, it's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? Sometimes more blessing than curse, but sometimes sometimes it's a tricky place to be. But we just need more people in that world, don't we? We need more people to be able to use those skills or their skills for these more comms roles, because there's plenty of people out there that can do it, plenty of people that can't, and that's absolutely fine. And that's why these job roles have to exist for people. And I think a researcher once said to me, well, it's publish first, communicate later. And they're absolutely right. That works perfectly for their world. But we can't lose sight of the fact that, you know, in a charity, obviously, the research is funded by money from fundraisers. So we have a duty of care to those people to make sure that they know what we're doing, and they know that we're making progress with their money. And even university funded money, I mean, a lot of that is taxpayer money. Like, we have a duty of care to these people to make sure that they know that their money's going to good use, and it is going to good use. But you don't know that if nobody's telling you or communicating it in a way that you understand. I read a really interesting piece probably a couple of months ago now about how it's not about dumbing down science for people, and how we need to change that narrative, that it's not like, we don't dumb it down for people that aren't scientists. It's just about making it accessible and understanding who you're communicating it to and making that appropriate. And that's really resonated with me, because it is a bit of a bugbear of mine that people say, oh, well, I can't dumb this down. And it's like, no, it's not. You're not speaking to people that are dumb. You don't need to make it simple. You're just speaking to people who don't understand science the way you do. And that is most of the population. And that's absolutely fine.
To me, I sometimes get a bit controversial when I'm pushed on that stuff, and I'm like, you are hiding behind the jargon and the science.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's a sign of not really understanding it themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
But that's a bit controversial. Let's not go there. Where I will go, though, is to invite you to take a swish of your research adjacent magic wand. What would you like to change about the world that you work in? Maybe it's one of the things we've already talked about. Maybe it's something different.
I think the world that I work in is definitely a growing field. And I think it's a case of trial and error, as with most things. But I think if I had this magic wand and budget was no issue, I think for me, one of the most important things would be having a research communications professional in medical charities, in all institutes, in universities, just to make sure that we're bridging that gap between really complicated science and, you know, people that just don't understand what we're doing. And I think I can speak, I suppose, most relevantly to the charity world. It's obviously budgets are tight, and the money needs to go to the right places. We need to make sure that there's a good balance of how we're using fundraisers' money. But I think if budget was no issue, I think these small medical charities, they should have science communications teams. I'm not saying big numbers, but at least a couple of people who can really focus on what the research is, why we're doing it, and the outcomes. Because, you know, in the brain tumor world, there haven't been any new treatments for brain tumors in decades. There's certainly no cure for a brain tumor in a lot of cases, certainly for the most aggressive ones. And we, as our charity, and there are many other charities that are ploughing millions of pounds into this research. But I think what people don't understand, and quite rightly so, is that, well, if we're ploughing all of this money in, why is there not a cure? Like, it seems ridiculous that we can't get to that point. But I think you need people within those charities, and it's not just ours, there's plenty of them, who can actually communicate that science and make sure people understand, you know, what the stages are, what the difference between, like, really sort of like basic in the sense that you're in a laboratory, you're pipetting, you're using petri dishes, that kind of thing, growing cells, like how you get from that point to a clinical trial and a drug that will actually get into a human and be a cure or be a treatment or improve quality of life. And I think there's a real gap in the market for that kind of thing. And I think if it was possible, we should have those professionals within charities who can do that, because inevitably people are raising money for research. There are, for us as well, there are support services, but a lot of people want to raise money for research. They want cures to all of these diseases that have affected themselves or their loved ones. And I think we have to make sure that we're communicating that research to those people, not only so that they feel that we're doing a good job, but so that they feel comfortable to carry on donating if they think the cause is worthy enough. And so I think having those professionals in those roles in the right places across, like I say, charities, scientific institutes, universities, I just think is really important. And it's sort of one of those things that feels at the moment like, we don't need it. It's a nice to have, but actually it is quite essential when all of this money is going towards research, in my opinion. And obviously I'm biased, but that's where I would certainly focus my energy if I could.
Yeah, well, it's your magic wand, so
exactly.
You get to choose. Yeah. I think, though, it's taking people on a journey with you. It's just part of it, isn't it? It's, whoever those people are. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I think on that note, we should think about wrapping up our conversation. But if anybody would like to find out more about you, connect to you, where's the best place to find you?
I'm on Twitter. I'm absolutely, or X, or whatever we call it nowadays. Absolutely happy for people to reach out on there. So it's just at JL Passey. And LinkedIn, pretty easy to find. It's not one of those, it's a name that's quite easy to find if you just search it. Yeah, more than happy for people to reach out if that helps. Like I was saying to you the other day, if one person can be inspired to, buck the trend and go and do something slightly different with their career, then, that's a job well done, isn't it? So more than happy to chat with people. And I'll make sure I send you some photos of the exhibit that we put together.
Yeah. Fantastic. Oh, well, yeah, we'll get them in the show notes as well, along with all your contact details. So Perfect. Thank you so much for coming along and sharing your story.
Oh, thank you ever so much for having me. It's been lovely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.